This is Detroit's Darkest Times. Today we're going to talk about Scripps Park. This is a park that I used to hang out in with my friends on Trumbull Avenue and Grand River. This park here, years ago, right across Trumbull Avenue, there's a big house across from the park. And as I was coming up, this was a halfway house. But years ago, this Scripps Park used to be the backyard to that house across the street. And this is a story I was told by an older gentleman that lived in the neighborhood. I never looked into it or whatever, but he said Scripps Park used to be somebody's backyard. Anyways, the halfway house was across the street. They always had a lot of people hanging around on the porch, in the yard, going through the neighborhood, stuff like that. And there's a library on the other side of the park. And at this library, we used to go there, check out books, watch movies. They would play movies on Sunday. It might have been Saturday, but I think it was Sunday. They would play movies, and you can go over there and watch movies. And then in the summer, sometimes a semi-truck would come and park in front of the library, and the whole back trailer was a swimming pool. And then they would let so many kids go in the pool at a time, and they had a lifeguard and all that. So it was pretty cool for the neighborhood. And but that only came like once in a blue moon. And so most of the time in the city, some people would turn on the fire hydrants on the side streets, and then all the neighborhood kids would play in the water and get wet on the fire hydrants. And sometimes cars would cruise by slowly, and everybody get out the way, and they would just run their car through the water, one side, and they'd come back and run it through the other side, and kind of like rinsing their car off, I guess. And but a lot of times they used to stick a stick inside the fire hydrant. And if you did that, the water, instead of it shooting straight out, it would shoot up kind of like a waterfall, And that was one way that, a lot of us stay cooled off in the summertime. And we used to do different things in the summer, and we used to go to Wayne State University, and they had things over there you could do. Then they had a boys club. You go to the boys club sometimes. But a lot of times we would just hang out on the streets, ride bikes. Sometimes we'd just walk the neighborhood and walk. Sometimes we'd walk downtown. Sometimes we'd ride bikes downtown. It just depended, And each time it would be a different group of us going, Sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 guys, and sometimes it'd be 6 or 8 guys, and then sometimes it'd be like 10 or 12, So it just depends on how many people, and sometimes girls with us too, And it would depend, how many would go down there and stuff. But Scripps Park was interesting because you could they had swing slides, they had a barbecue area where you could cook out, stuff like that. We used to walk on our hands and do flips and all that in the grass. Hang out there quite a bit. And I looked up this area right here where I grew up in, and when I looked at it on the internet, my old house was actually the only one still there on the block. Because they're doing a lot of demolition or remodeling and rebuilding in Detroit City. But last I checked, my house was still standing on Trumbull Avenue. And that's 3709 Trumbull Avenue. And also 3711. Because we actually lived downstairs and upstairs during the period of time we stayed at the house before we moved to Elm Street. But yeah, last I checked, I was really surprised that the house was still standing. I remember when I first moved over there, we moved there from Canfield in Trumbull. And Canfield in Trumbull was an apartment building up there by Edmondson Elementary that we lived at. And my parents was I'm not sure if they was assistant manager or manager. Then my godmother was either or, the manager or the assistant manager. I don't know. They both kind of ran that building right there. I think my parents was the manager and my godmother was assistant manager. I think that's how it went. But I was a young man at that time, but I remember living in that building. And then we moved down to Trumbull to 3711. First we was 3711. And then we stayed there for a while. And then we moved downstairs after my aunt and uncle, they used to live downstairs. After they moved, we moved downstairs. And then this lady, Vicky, she moved upstairs. And but anyways, that was a park that we hung out a lot and, did a lot of different things at that park. Hung out quite a bit there. Then we hung out at on Elm Park when we moved down the street to Elm Street. So it was interesting. And I tell a lot of people that, when that Nightmare on Elm Street came out, the movie, that I told them, I used to live on Elm Street. But it wasn't actually the Elm Street in the movie, but that was the name of our street, Elm Street. And then on Ash, off of Trumbull, we had a friend that had an apartment over there. Tony Hall. He had this Pioneer stereo that every time you go over, walk past his house, or just go to it, he had an apartment in this building. And back then, people just had, some people had some good stereos like Pioneer and stuff like that. And it would have the music real loud. You could hear it down the whole block, really. But at that time, people were into that kind of stuff. Now, if you do it, most likely your neighbors would probably call for disturbance, or something like that. But I guess it just depends on where you live at, to be honest about that. But Ash was something else. And I remember on Elm Street, when my parents had got, they was getting ready to get a divorce. And they was separating. And I remember my dad, he had went out looking for the dude because there was another dude involved. And my dad went out looking for that guy, and he actually went with some friends of his, and looking around, see if he could find out where the dude was at. But I think he finally found. He didn't find the dude. He found the car, and then he flattened all the tires on the car. All four tires. He flattened all the tires. And I guess because he was mad, whatever, but that's what happened. And I thought that was crazy, at that time, because I was a young guy at that time. And but after that, he had left and went back to his mother's house, and then they ended up getting a divorce. And then after that, we ended up living a little longer on Elm Street, and then we left Elm Street and went to Livernois Avenue. And this is behind the Big D's bar. It's basically like a house, but / apartment or whatever, because it was kind of hooked to, it was like one big building and it was all connected together. So you had Big D's bar in the front. Upstairs, you had 2 apartments over the bar. And then in the back, you could say it was a house, but it was connected. I always just called it an apartment. And it had a garage hooked to it. And years later, after my parents moved out of the house, my sister and her husband moved into that place. And this is when we started. Me and her husband and a friend of mine, we started selling stuff out of the garage, like, garage sale and stuff like that. And we were selling all kind of stuff. Then we just had the idea that, we would tell people that, if they had anything to sell at their house, bring it to us and tell us how much you want for it. And then we'd add money to it and still make money like that. So that ended up being a pretty strong situation there for a while, because a lot of people kept bringing stuff for us to sell. So it was kind of like, we never ran out of something to sell, So that was a pretty good hookup right there to make some money on the side. But there was always something to do in that neighborhood. We just were finding things to do to make money, Like sometimes when it would rain really hard, anybody that knows about Livernois Avenue in Detroit, Michigan, the viaducts where the trains go over Livernois Avenue, the viaduct's got like a dip. I mean, the street goes under the viaduct, but it's got like a dip. It goes down and then up. And sometimes in viaducts used to get flooded. And I guess just maybe the drains would get clogged up or whatever, but it would get flooded. It would get like, I believe about, in the middle, it'd be like 2 foot of water. And people would still try to drive through it. And if somebody had a real high vehicle, they could actually go through it. But people in regular cars, they would go through it and their car would stall. And then that's when we would ask them, do they want us to push them out? We would just hang out down there, not in the water, but when people would stall out, we'd ask them, do they want us to push them out? And naturally they're going to say yes. And we usually just tell them $5 a car, And a lot of times, people would pay, and then a lot of times people wouldn't pay, and they would just get their car running after they got out of the water, and then they'd take off. But most people would pay. So that was, a pretty good hustle that we did, at that time. And there was one time, me and a friend of mine, Mike, we was at his house, and well, actually, it was Sherry Soulsby's house, but they were like living together. So it was his house, but it was actually his old lady's house. And anyways, he was hanging around there, and then he was trying to figure out what to do that day. And then so we started, like cleaning up the house and the yard and stuff like that. And then he actually looks under the house. It's got like a little doorway where you could look under the house. And then he sees bags and bags and bags. I mean, a lot of them full with 2-liter bottles, empty bottles of, sodas and stuff like that. And these empty bottles are 10 cents each. So he asked his old lady, he says, do you know there's a whole lot of bags of empty bottles under the house? And she was like, yeah. She said, every time we'd get a bag full, my mom would tell me to throw them under the house. So she said she did that for years, And so he said, well, I'm going to pull them all out, and then me and Melvin's going to take them and take them to the store and return them. And she's like, yeah. She said, I forgot they was even under there. They've been under there so long. So, man, he pulls out these bags, and he just keeps pulling the bags out. And it was just a ton of them. So what we did, we couldn't take all of them because it was a lot. So we took so many bags. I forget how many it was, but we took so much and took them over there to Jim Poller's store, cashed them in. And then he decided he wanted to, have a cookout over there, stuff like that. So we ended up doing that. But there was always something to do, or, we'd come up with something to do in the neighborhood just to get the day going, especially in the summertime. And one time, me and him and her and their 2 boys, one time I went by their house. I was in a Maverick, a black Maverick. And I went by their house and asked them, did they want to go to Belle Isle? Because we all hung together pretty tight. And they was like, yeah, we need to go to the grocery store and get some stuff so we can cook while we're over there. And, there was always drinks involved no matter what we did, even if we was just hanging out on the corner or just sitting on the front porch or whatever. So anybody that knows about Detroit, that's mainly what people do, is just party and kick it, and, and then a lot of other things too. But, there's always going to be drinks involved and cooking involved and stuff like that. just to get the day going good. But we go over to Belle Isle Island and spend the whole day over there cooking, hanging out over there, swimming. We had a good time over there, you know. Then late that evening, because you've been out in the sun all that day, so the sun kind of drags you down, you know, especially if you've been partying and stuff like that. So later that evening, we come back and we end up going to my apartment. And then we, you know, end up having a party there and just hanging out, stuff like that. Because if we was partying, you know, at Belle Isle, we'd be at my apartment or we'd be at their house. Or sometimes we'd go to Bob's. A lot of times we hung out at Bob's too. And that's Mike's brother. And sometimes we'd hang out there, you know, and just whatever happened, you know. Sometimes we'd just throw horseshoes. Sometimes we'd play music in the basement, stuff like that. And we had a lot of parties in his basement. We had a lot of parties everywhere, to be honest with you, back in the day, because that's just what it was in Detroit. It was just cooking, partying, throwing horseshoes, music, things like that, you know. So there was always something going on. And then, you know, everybody in the neighborhood, everybody knew everybody. So, you know, a lot of times a lot of girls would come by and stuff like that, want to hang out, things like that. So it was pretty on and popping, actually. I remember I met this one girl. Her name was Lisa. I met her on Otis and Military. And the last time I seen her, let me go ahead. I met this girl, and I met her through a friend of mine, Sherry Soulsby. And then when I met her, I was single, so me and her was kicking it for a while, stuff like that. And then we ended up parting ways. And then some years passed, and then I came back to the area, and then I moved on Hammond and Otis. And when I lived on Hammond and Otis, sometimes I used to cross over the tracks to go over to Pay and Save grocery store. And one time I was coming back from Pay and Save, and I was walking down the side street. I don't recall what the name of that street was, but it's a side street coming back from Pay and Save toward the railroad tracks. And then I see this lady on the porch, and some kids playing on the sidewalk. And then I walk past, and then she said, after I get past her, she don't say nothing when I'm right there. I guess she notices me, and then I'm walking, and she's like, "You ain't gonna say anything to me?" And I didn't know if she was talking to me or somebody else, so I kept walking. Then she yelled. Then I turned around, and then I seen that it was Lisa. And it surprised me because I didn't know she was still in that neighborhood. And I told her actually where I lived at, and she was like, "Well, you had your chance back in the day." She said, "I'm with somebody now," and I was like, "Oh, all right. I was just letting you know that I stay across the railroad tracks, you know, because I didn't know what her situation was, if she's with somebody or whatever." But she was a pretty good girl. We spent a little time together. But I spent a little time with a lot of different girls in that neighborhood, to be honest with you. And they was all good girls, And I hope they're doing great today. But yeah, I was just some girl that I met, through Sherry, you know. And Sherry was a good girl because she was like, me and her was real close, and she was like, we was just tight, just put it that way. And she's no longer here anymore. She passed away, but she's really missed. And we were tight. Me and her boyfriend was tight. And I was tight with everybody, to be honest with you, in the neighborhood, but there was just certain people that we all just kind of really clinged together. So Mike, Bobby, Susan, and their other sister, I think her name was Kathy, but I'm not certain on it. Karen. It was Karen. And we was all pretty tight, and hung around a lot together. Sometimes we'd end up going to Susie's house. And I think she lived over there off Michigan Avenue. I want to say on McGraw or something. But anyway, she lived over there, and sometimes me and Mike and Bob, or me and Bob and Karen, we would go to her house, hang out for a little while, whatever. And but yeah, them days was interesting because we was always doing something, And Bob, he worked at Michigan Dry Ice, and they had one on Military, a little ice place right by the viaduct. And then he mostly worked at the one down John Cronk. I think it was in Dearborn, and it was another dry ice company. And he used to walk all the way down John Cronk to that one and then walk back. But sometimes he would be working at the one on Military. And I don't know if he just worked there on the weekends or what, but and all they did there was just make dry ice and stuff like that. Well, they cut dry ice and stuff like that. But I guess he seemed to like it because he was there, and but me and Mike, we used to, like I said in my past videos, I had a plumbing business. Even before I had the plumbing business, me and Mike would do different things like painting, or little side plumbing jobs before I actually got the plumbing business off the ground. And so me and him would just do whatever, to make some extra money and stuff. And then they ended up, they was living on John Cronk. Sherry and Mike was with their two boys, and they were small then. And that was Sean and Jeremy. And then later Sherry finds out, okay, her dad passed away, her mom passed away, and then she's got an older brother. She's actually got two brothers and one sister. And but her oldest brother lives on Hammond, right down the road, right on the same block that I lived in the future, where I lived at in the future when I ran into Lisa. He lives on Hammond. Well, a lot of times in the neighborhood, if she wanted to, get some money or whatever, she would go to her brother's house and get money and then come back and then, we'd all do whatever. But she goes over there one time and I guess he's telling her that she's got money to buy a house if she wants a house or something like that. So no, here's what happened. On Military, if you go down Military underneath the viaduct, there was a white house. And it was a nice white house with armor guard doors and all that. Well, it ended up being for sale. And then she was like, I'd like to have that house. And, we had rode past it. We actually got out, looked in the windows and stuff. You couldn't hardly see nothing in the windows because they had curtains and stuff on it. And, but it was a nice house. And she was like, I'd like to have this house. So, like I said, she go to her older brother sometime. And so later he tells her she's got money to buy a house with. And, or pay down on the house or something like that. But anyways, this money was from her parents. He was just the oldest one in the family, so I guess they left him in charge of, the money and making sure they get money or whatever. And so anyways, she comes back one day from her brother's because she's going over there, not just to get money. She goes and visits them and stuff like that. And she comes back and she tells Mike, her old man, and me, because me and him was together, she said, my brother said, and she already looked at the house, and she said, my brother said I got some money to buy the house. And then Mike was like, really? And she said, yeah. And her brother told her to call the phone number and find out more information about it and then get back with him, So what had happened is she called and then they ended up looking at the house. And actually, I took them over there to actually look at the house. And then later on, they ended up buying this house, And this was a nice house,